This is from the website thewaythetruthandthelife.net. I'm interviewing a friend, Frank Odle, who was in the U.S. Army and entered Buchanwald on the day that it was liberated. The pictures, notes, and newspaper articles are Frank's. Frank has given me permission to interview him and use these materials, including the interview, to have a record of what he experienced as he entered Buchanwald concentration camp. This is a videotape interview with a friend of my stepfather, Walter Rahn. This is Frank Odle. Both he and my stepfather were in the American Army in Germany in World War II. Frank was part of those who came in to Buchanwald the day it was liberated. Here's a picture of Frank and my stepfather, Walter, with Frank's obituary from August 2013. On one of my daily visits with Frank, I mentioned about seeing on the news about this archbishop in Argentina that denied the Holocaust. And that's what led Frank to tell me about this experience of being part of the liberation of Buchanwald. And he went and got his pictures and showed them to me. That's when I decided to interview him, because it would not only help with this Holocaust denial, but it would help Frank in debriefing with some of the pain that still remained. After the interview in 10 parts, I will show the CBS News video interviewing this priest.
To give you an idea, I originally entered the Army on 25th of August 1942, and I was discharged the 18th of November 1945. I served overseas for 3 years. I was in 5 battles, Normandy, Northern France, Rhineland, Central Europe, and Ardennes. And I have battle stars for those 5. And when I came back, I was discharged within a few days, and so most of my time was spent overseas.
And what was the concentration camp that your battalion liberated?
Well, my battalion didn't actually liberate it. It was liberated by other troops, but we were all congregated together. It was Buchanwald. And if I remember, I think the town closest by was Weimar.
And how many days after it was liberated did you and your fellow troops arrive?
Arrived just after it was liberated, part of the same day.
Same day. Okay, so you saw conditions basically on the day.
Yes, plus as we got within 5 miles of the camp, why, you started to smell it. It was death, the smell of death everywhere. It just permeated your clothes. It permeated your nostrils. It was a terrible smell.
And what caused that?
The death of all those people that they killed. When we got there was 3 or 4 carloads of bodies that had been thrown into rail cars, and they were to have been hauled out and buried. But the Allies, the planes knocked out the railways, so they were stuck with those in the camp, and there were hundreds of bodies in them that were rotting, and so the smell of it was absolutely terrible.
You want to mention we've been talking before, a couple of your fellows actually explored what was there.
Yes, there was a couple of the guys that the smell was so great that they didn't know exactly where it was coming from. It was everywhere. So they saw these rail cars, and they decided that they must be something valuable in them. They were trying to get out with them and couldn't do it. So between the two of them, they pushed very hard and managed to get one of the doors to slide open slightly. And nothing but rotten flesh fell out on them, on the ground, all over. So they immediately stripped their clothes because it was all over them too.
This is the end of part 1. This is part 2 of a 10-part interview. We'll show 2 pictures of the same scene. Here we'll call them Picture 1 and Picture 2. This says Buchanwald, Germany, bodies outside the crematory and a truck full of bodies, April 1945.
Picture of a bunch of bodies that had been stored. They, of course, in most cases, they strip them so that they use the uniforms over again. But I don't know who, but somebody came in right after they saw this and hung wreaths. And I don't know who did it, whether it was service people, whether it was somebody from the local town, or whether it was inmates. But they were hanging there when I first saw it. And, of course, the picture next to it is just additional bodies and so forth.
I see some writing on the bottom of the picture. Do you want to explain what that is?
Well, that was nothing more than I just wrote on it myself so that I would remember what it was and all.
Okay, I see. Buchanwald, Germany, April 2nd, 1945.
That was just my own writing that I had.
And now, would you? Looks like the next picture is a close up of the same scene. Am I correct?
Yes, it is. Now those bodies are next to the crematory, so they would have been the next ones cremated.
What's in this picture? You can see the back end of a truck. What was that?
That's a loaded haul bodies. They've used it for maybe the other things, but it was full of bodies at the time.
This ends part 2. Now for part 3. Picture 1, Picture 2, Picture 3. Frank wrote on it, Buchanwald, Germany, April 1945.
Frank, this is picture number 3. Would you describe how you got this picture?
Well, when we went in, according to one of the inmates that was still able to converse and still had some strength left in him, most of them were walking dead, even if they were still alive. But this supposedly, according to him, was where they brought bodies from all over and put them there, mostly from a truck that we saw before. And eventually, those bodies would either be taken to the crematory, or if they couldn't work fast enough to do it, they'd be loaded in cars and taken to a mass grave somewhere outside the camp, which I don't know where that would have been.
You mentioned the way these people looked.
They were just, they were skin bones. Their eyes were hollow. The skin was terrible looking, a yellow, pale look to it. And when you say Walking Dead, they just stare at you and they didn't know what to say or do, and most of them wouldn't live very long.
You mentioned earlier to me that you gave them some of your food. Did you mention that?
For those that were alive when we went in, why, of course, they were all hungry. They'd only, according to them, they'd only had just potato peeling soup and maybe something made out of sawdust that resembled sausage. And what they would do is come up and just stare at you. Some would ask for something or hold out their hand. But what we started to do, all the soldiers started to give them K rations or C rations, whatever they had. And
what did that amount to? Dried food?
It was dried food or some had small cans of wet food in the package. And this was a regular ration given by the Army. So we started to give them out, and then an officer came by and said that we better stop doing that because said they're just going to get sick, and he was a medical officer, and sure enough, as you would give them this food, they'd gobble it down, and within a few seconds, most of them would throw it up. Their stomach would resist. They just could not take it. They'd only been on liquid diet probably for weeks and weeks, and with a few potato peelings, so the food they couldn't digest.
This is the end of Part 3, the beginning of Part 4. Picture 1, Picture 2, Picture 3, Picture 4. Picture 5 and Picture 6.
Frank, we have pictures 4, 5, and 6 showing some ovens. Would you explain to us what we're looking at in these pictures?
This was the upper floor of the crematory, and they could, I don't know how many, but they could pile more than one body in at a time. And when we got there, why, there was a part of a body still hanging out. The rest had been burned out, and I imagine it was because the Allies came in and scared them and then just never closed the door. They never finished it. And this man right here, he was, I don't know whether you'd say given respite or something. In other words, he was one of the inmates, but they used him to help around places, so they did give him a little food and so forth. Now, what happened to him, I don't know. Whether he got in trouble with the rest of them later on, I have no idea. But the box he's got in his hand is partly filled with gold teeth. And what they would do is that before they would ever cremate, they would check their mouths and see if they had gold in their mouth. And if they did, they would just pull the teeth, gold and all out. And those were kept and used in the Nuremberg trials. As a matter of fact, I had some gold teeth from there, as well as some lampshades, which we'll get into later on. But I turned those over to an Army captain in intelligence because you said that they someday might be used in trials, and sure enough, according to what I understand, they were used in the Nuremberg trials against the camp commander and his wife.
The camp commander's wife was known as the Witch of Buchanwald. We'll see why later. Now we move on to part 5. We'll review the first photographs and then present a new one and move to discussion with Frank. Here's the new one.
Okay, we see some rack here in picture 7. Could you explain what that's about?
According to the inmates, if I remember right, you could hang 6 people at one time on that rack. And the guards, whenever they had somebody that messed up or gave them trouble or whatever, and they decided to hang, whether it was 1 or 6 at one time, they would force all the inmates that were able to walk to come out and watch the hanging. In other words, and if they turned their face and didn't look, they'd hang them also.
Is that your writing picture?
Yes.
This ends part 5. We now enter part 6. We review the photographs, but the main topic here is the wife of the commandant who, when he was transferred, became commandant, and what happened to her.
Frank, you mentioned to me about the wife of the camp commander and some of her actions. Would you tell me again, I can report that, about this camp commander's wife and what she did?
She was a fairly good-looking woman, redhead, and she loved tattoos. And so any inmate that was brought in and had a tattoo that she liked on him, then she would have the guards to take the person, put him in a bathroom, wash him up, or have him bathe, and then she would sleep with him nude at night, have sex with him, because of those tattoos. She had a affinity for him. And the next day, then he was automatically killed, and his skin, where the tattoo was stripped off, and those skins were dried, and later on became parts of lampshades that she had made. And some of those lampshades I had, a couple of them, that according to the trials, they were also shown in the Nuremberg trials. And her nickname, as far as all the camp was concerned, even the guards, was the camp commander's wife, known as the red-headed bitch of Buchanwald. And she was tried, and she was convicted, and if I remember right, in Nuremberg, she was given the death sentence. I know that at one time, while in prison, she was being guarded by American troops. Of course, Allied troops were there, but she was being guarded by American troops. And lo and behold, the woman got pregnant as a prisoner. And to this day, I guess nobody knows or cares who the father was. But somebody got to her.
According to Wikipedia, Elsa Cook, die Hexe von Buchanwald, the witch of Buchanwald, was sentenced to life imprisonment and committed suicide in her Bavarian prison cell in September 1967. This is Part 7 with a review of the pictures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the new one. You could stop frame to read the details of this photograph taken in April 11, 1945.
Yes, where the ovens are, where you showed the ovens, a picture of them, that's the first floor. On the second floor are actually the basement floor of this building, consisted of a torture chamber. And what they had was a large glassed-in shower room. It looked like a shower room and had, if I remember right, some 6 or 8 different shower heads coming out of the wall. And German scientists and doctors testing out their gases, different gases, and how it would affect human beings. They would tell those people they were going to take a shower. They would put them inside, and they couldn't see out, but the guards and doctors and so forth could see in. So what they would do would introduce gas. Certain gas would come through the nozzle, and see how it affected them, how long it took for them to die, or what position the body might have taken or fallen, or their eyes or face or whatever. And then they had a method where that gas could be withdrawn so that it cleansed itself up and there was nothing showing except the dead guys on the... And also they had on the wall different things. They had racks that you could put a human being on and torture with parts of the body being attached and so forth. On the wall they had outline of a human body that had like small handcuffs or this type of thing, small metal cuffs that they could strap this person to the wall upright, and from that point if they wanted to strap down his wrist, then they could pull one of his fingers out at a time, just actually pull them out, and the man might pass in and out of several times while this is being done. They could pull an arm off the shoulder if they wanted to. Any part of the body they wanted to pull off that they could attach to with I guess you'd say a metal chain or whatever it was. And there might have been other things, but those were the big things that were in the torture chamber. And that was on the ground floor of the crematory.
When you say ground floor, now we looked at the furnaces and there was a truck backing up to was this torture chamber in a level below that?
No, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. The torture chamber was the first floor. There wasn't anything above it. But the torture chamber itself was on the basement floor. And that's the mistake I made to say.
So the furnace was the first floor.
And then you went downstairs into the basement. And that was where the torture chamber, the gas chambers, and so forth.
This ends Part 7. In Part 8, we again review the previous pictures and then have a picture of one of the inmates, and Frank discusses what he was told about him. This is the inmate, and Frank will share what he knows about him.
Frank, I see in picture 8, looks like a man with some bandages. Can I talk about this?
The only thing that I know about him, if you notice the machine behind showing Buchanwald, but he was an inmate, according to the way I understand, that had been beaten. He hadn't been in very long, and some doctors from the Army patched him up and put some bandages on him and so forth. Now, that's my understanding.
This is the end of Part 8. This is Part 9, and I think you'll find this quite interesting. Again, we review the previous photographs and then add one more at the end of an article published in a local newspaper. But Frank goes on to say a very interesting story of what happened when the general was outraged that the local city would allow this to happen.
The town closest by, which was only about 3 miles away, and again, my memory may not be the best, but I think it was Weimar. The general that was in charge of the troops, all the troops that went into Buchanwald, he was so upset about what happened that he went into the town with troops, went to the mayor's office, and told him that he wanted every human being that could walk in that town to be outside and ready to move the next day, because they were going to clean up that camp. Every person in town, children and all that could walk, would be forced to help to clean up and deodorize and sanitize that camp. And so that went on for a few days. He did have them, and they did do it.
How many people were in that town? It wasn't that big of a city then.
No, it seemed to me like, and again, my memory can deceive me, but it seemed to me like it was some 6,000 or so.
This ends Part 9. This is the last section. Again, we'll review the pictures. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is labeled Picture 12. It's a timeline of the Holocaust.
And then the last picture we have, 12, is showing the Holocaust and the timeline starting from January 30th, 33, all the way up to October 1st, 1946. And again, when was it that you were there?
I was there for 3 years, between December the 8th, 42, to I think it was August of 45. 3 years approximately.
These are local articles collected by Frank.
It's Fort Myers.
Fort Myers, Section B.
Right, and the only thing I did, I thought it was interesting talking about it, and I just cut those out and put them with these pictures. But and by the way, I had many more pictures that were stolen from me. I lived in a house that I was working up near Pensacola, that somebody stole a couple of guns that I had, German weapons, and pictures. I also had one massive flag at one time, which was the city flag of Bad Godesberg on the right. but it deteriorated over the years, and so I just threw it away. It was no good. I think these are local papers. This really had nothing to do with me being in Buchanwald. It was just that they were so graphic in talking about what happened, and I had been over there myself, that I thought it was interesting, and just for the future, somebody might say, well, how do we know this or that? And so,
did you ever think they're going to be lost from our history?
Well, there are people that are trying to make them lost, and have been from the time that they were committed. There are people that their whole agenda, and they're from all over the world. It's not just this country or Germany. They're from all over the world that try to make the Holocaust nothing. It didn't happen. You'll find that in several countries like Iran and some of the Mideast countries. They're taught, the children are taught that it didn't exist. There was no such thing.
I remember the president of Iran saying that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Frank. I want to thank you very much for this opportunity to have a first-hand testimony. This is March 7th, and just within the last month, there has been a lot in the internet news about a Catholic bishop, and I saw the video of him denying the Holocaust.
Right. This happens.
It turns out he was English, is English, but was serving as a bishop in Argentina. And I just heard that Argentina has expelled him.
Yes, I understand this.
Yeah.
I believe that the historical evidence is is hugely against 6 million Jews having been deliberately gassed in gas chambers as a deliberate policy of Adolf Hitler.
But you say not one Jew was killed.
In gas chambers.
So there was no gas chambers.
I believe there were no gas chambers.
Thank you, Frank, for your sacrifice to make our home safe. This is the end.